Okay, so I think PagerDuty fairly recently published a US study that reveals, perhaps a little bit surprisingly, that there's a very large-scale mistrust of AI alongside a sort of nervousness in terms of using it. So, were you surprised about that result when it came out?
No, I think that there's a lot of folks that are trying to work through how best to take advantage of this, I think, relatively new technology, but I think a very promising and powerful technology. So I do think folks are trying to understand sort of what's the best approach to making sure that they get the advantage that it provides, but also doing it in a very thoughtful, kind of secure and compliant way. So it hasn't been surprising to me as I talk to my peer group. I think we're all trying to work through what are the best ways to build the right structure inside our organizations to be able to take advantage of Gen AI.
Yeah, and I think also the survey revealed that some of the respondents at least were sufficiently concerned that they'd actually sort of paused their AI usage and gone back to thinking, about guidelines and policies before they maybe carried on. Is how common was that reply, if you like? Is that the majority of companies or only the select few that are thoughtful enough to sort of do that?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies were just taking a quick step back because it kind of sort of came out of the gate, right? It was like, hey, check out this new, this all these breakthroughs. I mean, AI has been around for some time, but all of a sudden, Gen AI became something that became even that much more powerful. And I think all of a sudden, all of these different use cases started to show up in market, both from a consumer perspective and from a kind of an enterprise business perspective. And I don't think companies were caught off guard, but I think companies were not quite completely clear on sort of what some of the guidelines and some of the controls that they may need to put in place. And there was a little bit of a learning curve that I think many companies are going through. So I do think there was a just maybe not a pause, but maybe a bit of a slowdown to say, hey, let's get our guidelines and our policies established here, and before we get too deep and too far into this, because the last thing especially in the enterprise space, any company wants to have is data going somewhere it's not supposed to. That's kind of the whole goal here. Is you want to make sure that you're being protective of your employees and your customers' data.
But I'm fairly sure that nobody was sufficiently worried that they say they're going to abandon Gen AI. So what I'm saying, put it the other way, everyone thinks that they have to, deploy Gen AI. If they don't, they're going to be missing out, fall behind competition. Was that reflected in the survey?
Yeah, I think that everyone, I think in this survey results, the number of folks that were saying that maybe they're slowing it down or pausing it was there or concerns was fairly high. But on the flip side, there were also I think a pretty high a substantial number of folks that were saying we are going to continue to move forward with it. And I agree with this the kind of sentiment that came through on the survey, which is the fact that Gen AI is going to be the future, right? And so how you harness it, how you put it to the best use in your organization is going to, for many companies, could become and may become the competitive advantage. So over time, what we've been seeing is these technologies that may have been a competitive advantage become commoditized. As far as a lot of the infrastructure, the tools and technologies we've been leveraging, and companies are continuing to look for how do we take advantage of our data, our processes, to drive some competitive advantage. And I think Gen AI just really sort of supercharges that. So I don't think if you're a company, regardless of what industry you're in, I think Gen AI is going to have to be part of the future state, right? And so I don't think that you can walk away from it. I don't think you can pause it indefinitely. I think you have to be continuing to move forward with it. And every company may have a little bit different sort of pace at which they adopt it. But I truly believe it is going to be a competitive advantage for companies across every industry.
And presumably there's I mean, everyone talks about Gen AI as if it all works perfectly well, but I'm guessing that people still need to be diligent when they're looking for Gen AI solutions to make sure that they're finding the right ones and also ones that they can trust to do what they say they'll do. I mean, is there a bit of hype that people need to be slightly wary of when it does actually come to deciding what to deploy?
Yeah. I mean, Phil, right now, every company I talk to is a Gen AI company. I don't know if that's completely true. In fact, I know it's not true. So I think there's a very steep hype curve going on right now. And if you're someone like in my position or in other companies where, your role is to look at how you leverage this new technology to really drive value for your company, I do think you have to take a step back and be thoughtful around how you approach this, and being somewhat use case driven to understand, like, what problem are we trying to solve, or what are the opportunities that Gen AI brings to us, and then think through that lens as you're looking through the different types of solutions that are available today, because there is a lot of hype going on in the market right now, and you're already seeing companies that came out early with a solution already starting to lose some traction in the market, just because the cycle time that we're seeing now in the space is actually accelerating pretty dramatically. So folks that used to be partners are now competitors, and folks that were competitors are now becoming partners, and people are being acquired, and there's a lot going on right now. And so I think it's good advice to be cautious, and it's also good advice to be very purpose driven in the way you're going out and looking at this technology.
And I think the survey also, back to sort of perhaps people's concerns, there's some element of the people responded worried about, Gen AI, if it goes wrong, could risk corporate reputation. I think there are also concerns around, I'm not sure anyone's really solved it yet, but around copyright and the sort of the legal aspect of it. Just your thoughts as to those sort of concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these models are, some of them are still in early days, and the models are continuing to evolve pretty quickly. I think even when they first came out onto the scene, I don't know, what was it, less than a year or so ago, there was some bias that was being generated through the models, and so there was definitely some concern around what kind of results you're getting. So I do think we also need to take a step back here. Gen AI is not perfect. It is only as good as the data you give it. And so I do think you have to be thoughtful around, how you're using this. And I'm not saying there needs to be human in the loop for everything, but I do think that there's still a role of humans to play in this process. And so as much as we want to try and automate everything all the time, I do think that you have to think through, like, what is the process we're using Gen AI for? From those results, what kind of decisions, or what kind of trigger, what are we doing with that data that Gen AI is providing? Then thinking thoughtfully about how, does it make sense to maybe have a human in the loop because you're doing something with this data? In some cases, that's the value and leverage you're trying to get, which is you need to move humans out of the loop. So really being careful about training those models and doing everything you can. Technology is not perfect. And, many times people don't take a step back and think about that. It's only as good as the data you give it. So I do think there's still a lot of lessons we're learning going through this journey. And I think people's concerns are valid too. Gen AI can provide a result that is inaccurate, and in some use cases that could become critical, right? You get into things like the medical industry and things like that, where it's like, you have to be very thoughtful around how you're using it. So I think these are all very legitimate concerns. And I do think there's still this learning curve we talked about that people are going through. So I think human in the loop is probably still going to be with us. And I think that when people talk, you hear the word co-pilot a lot. And I think what is also happening is people starting to kind of rethink the way that Gen AI can be used as an assistant to getting work done more effectively, maybe better, maybe faster, and not necessarily a replacement for, right? And so I think that's also something that is becoming, I'm hearing more and more of that. And you hear it in the name, right? Everyone seems to have a co-pilot. And so I think that's gonna continue on for some time.
And in terms of as you say, these training models, I mean, at the moment, it appears, whether I've got this right or not, that people seem to think they can just help themselves to whatever information they want to train their models and not worry about the copyright. I mean, I'm careful what I say, but certainly the large organizations seem to think they're big enough they can kind of just make their own rules up. Do you think that's going to happen, or over time will there be more nuances and there may be some legal cases that start defining, what information people can use to train their models, borrow or peg, whatever it is. It seems like the Wild West a bit at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's where people are putting a lot of these guidelines in place and trying to be really thoughtful around how they're. So there's sort of two pieces. There's actually three pieces. One is, how you train your models, as far as there's just broad, publicly available information out there that I think no one seems to have any concern with, and that's how a lot of these models are trained. And then there's someone like myself that's looking through the lens of how do I provide this solution to our employees and potentially even our customers so they can get more value out of leveraging the PagerDuty operations cloud, which is obviously we have a GenAI solution that we have built, and in fact we've been in the AI space for a number of years, and so well before GenAI, and because we do a lot of data correlation and we bring data together for people to help drive automation with their infrastructure and their services that they provide. So I think that use case, that second use case, is going to be really important to figure out, like, how do you put the right level of security around your corporate data, your customer data, your employee data, so that it doesn't leak out into the broader training data sets. And that's what this big kind of conflict is with folks like myself in CIO world, CTO world, is how do you ensure that you set up that architecture properly so that you don't have to worry about people making. I don't think people are being malicious. They just make mistakes. They load data up into one of these GenAI solutions, and that data all of a sudden becomes part of a data set that then is being used by the broader public. And that's obviously the concern a lot of legal teams and compliance teams and CIOs have. So that's sort of the second challenge, I think, that we're starting to get better controls around that. There's a lot of enterprise grade Gen AI solutions out there now that are helping companies to be able to manage that. I think the third thing that is now starting to be talked about is, do we run into a place where we run out of data? We can only generate so much data, and we generate this world generates a lot of data, but I think that the thirst and hunger for more and more training data, more and more models being built, there's all this conversation now around, synthetic data and being able to just generate, volumes and volumes of data to keep up with the pace of, because these models, the value of these models is as they get more data to train on, they become more intelligent. And so there's a lot of conversations around how do you continue to generate data at scale. And so you're starting to hear about synthetic data, which is a whole new area that people are talking about. So yes, data is really important. Security of that data is really important. But I do think we're starting to get better solutions for enterprise consumers of Gen AI to be able to put some guardrails around the sensitive corporate data so that it doesn't become part of the broader public data set.
And in terms of your sort of reasons behind the survey, and just more generally where PagerDuty fits within this sort of landscape, the Gen AI landscape, perhaps you can just outline, as I say, what it is that what you bring to this particular party, if you like, for your customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us it was just understanding the Gen AI landscape, because it's a space that we're also in. And again, like I said, there's a lot of companies that data is a part of their platform, of their solution, and we're no different. We deal with and manage a lot of data for organizations around the space of incident management and this whole concept of an operations cloud. And so we thought it was a very timely and a very valid a survey to run, just to understand what is the sentiment that we're getting from the broader market. And I think what it told us, it confirmed a lot of things I think we already knew. Obviously, getting the results back helps us to kind of to verify that. But the world we play in is around being able to manage and correlate lots of events, lots of data coming in, and helping companies to correlate that, put some intelligence around that, and then helping them to drive automation around, hey, maybe we could actually get to a world, and we feel like we're there, where we can actually help companies to identify when a problem's happening, that we can go and have it resolved for you. And you think, when I say problem, I mean, you can think about a lot of different things, scenarios, but just imagine you're a retailer and you have a website, and it's core to your business and your company's success. If that website starts to have infrastructure problems that are actually bringing the site down or slowing the site down, you lose revenue. And every minute that that site's not up and running, you're losing money. And so that can be catastrophic for an organization. And so, what our technology allows you to do is build some resiliency and into the back end of that technology, where if you start to see problems, we can help route those problems, correlate those problems, and even using Gen AI to help you solve what's going on with that infrastructure to get it back up and running incredibly quickly. And I think we're moving to a world where we could actually identify where there's a problem that's about to happen and getting to that sort of level of resiliency. And so I think the world that we're getting to, and this is where I think PagerDuty really plays a role in that, is how do we help companies to really build that resiliency into their infrastructure, and if they do have a problem, making sure that we resolve it very, very quickly. So that's sort of the world of this operations cloud that the PagerDuty is known for, and that we're providing and supporting our customers with. And so we think that world of data, and especially Gen AI, is going to be important. It's important to us, it's important to our customers, but I think it's important to the broader market. And so in doing this survey, I think it gave us a bit of a pulse check.
Just back to sort of Gen AI more generally, is it fair to say that as the industry matures, a lot of the problems, issues we perhaps touched on today will just go away as everyone gets wiser and more expert at it? Or by its very nature, is there an element of sort of risk and uncertainty around, Gen AI, regardless of how well regulated it may not be? You have to accept that to get the benefits, there's also a bit of a sort of, a risk as well.
I think with any new technology, I can think back through, as I told you early on, I've been a CIO 5 times, and there's been a lot of new technology innovation that's come to the market in the last few decades. And this one is a very transformational one. The internet was a transformational one. I mean, there's been mobile was a transformational one. There's been these big kind of step functions we've had in the world of technology. And with all of them, at first, it's always a bit messy. People are trying to get their arms around sort of what it means, what it doesn't mean, what can it do, what can it not do, what are the pros and cons of it. And we start to iron those out. And then there becomes this kind of world of, commoditization, where you're then trying to figure out who are the right players, and there's some consolidation. So you kind of go through these cycles. I don't know if it's going to be that different with Gen AI. I think there's a lot of vendors in the space. I think there's a lot of really good technology, and it's driving a lot of innovation. And as a buyer, you want to experiment, you want to kind of work your way into it, and you don't want to be left behind. And so getting in there, and for our strategy around, hey, how do we do some experimentation with Gen AI and start to find opportunities and good use cases for our employees to get value out of it, along with our customers in how they engage with the PagerDuty Operations Cloud, so that they can get full value out of Gen AI and what it offers, but doing it in a really thoughtful way, but still making sure we're moving forward with it. Because I do think the market and technology stacks are going to start to shift and change, and there's probably some consolidation, and I think they will get better. And we'll figure out ways to handle things like bias and some of the things that happen with hallucinations and all of these sort of terms that are now creeping up in Gen AI. There's going to be ways, the technology will find ways to continue to improve on those. And so I think it's a really exciting time. I mean, I think about what the next 5 years brings. I think we're gonna be able to solve use cases and do work as sort of humans. We're going to be able to do work that we never imagined we could ever do. And so I think it's a really exciting time. But with that is obviously going to be things we're going to have to contend with, and there's going to be always some things that you have to sort of manage through. There could be some negative scenarios and situations that show up, and so I think sometimes you have to take a little bit of the good and the bad, and try to reduce the bad by increasing the good, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, just in sort of finishing, is any sort of 1 or 2 bits of key advice you'd give to people in this sort of early Gen AI world, as to how you mentioned obviously people have perhaps pulled back a little bit and being more thoughtful, but any sort of practical advice as to the best way to go about this, to minimize, shall we say, the downsides and maximize the.
We talked a little bit about a few of them. I think one of the things out of the gate that I think most companies have done, if they haven't done it, it's like starting point A, which is sitting down and really building out a bit of a cross-functional virtual team around your legal, your IT, probably your data, your compliance teams to get together and talk a little. And there's enough now that people know out there that you could probably borrow and leverage and make your own around what are some general guidelines, policies that you should have as a company. Because if you have nothing, then you're leaving it to your employees to figure it out. And that's usually a recipe for a potential problem. And so just establishing some basic ground rules around how you're going to do that, that's one. Then two, really doing some experimentation and experimentation in a very controlled way around starting to think about what are some of the use cases. And there's plenty of examples of use cases for Gen AI, but how can you start to think through what are some use cases that can be of value to your organization? And then going out and looking at those. And there's a lot of companies now that have either it's a a best of breed technologies that we know all the names out there that have been in the enterprise space for a long time. They're coming out with Gen AI based features, and so how can you start to play around with some of those features? In addition to that, how can you actually start to experiment with maybe some more broader general purpose Gen AI out there? And so I think it's one of those things that I think what some people are making mistake is thinking that the Gen AI solution can sort of fix everything, do everything. And I think they then start to get disappointed. And so I do think you have to step back and talk about some of the use cases and like, what's it really good at? Maybe what it's not as good at. And so I think that's part of the second phase of that is gaining some knowledge and experience. And then I think I would kind of break it into these three phases. One is just like setting the foundation around policy and policy and process. The second is around knowledge and experimentation. And then I think the third, you start to fine tune those things. And then you can start building very purpose-built use cases because you know there's value there. You can make those investments and you can start to operationalize those. So I do think there's this kind of, I'm calling it this kind of three-phase journey that I think companies are going to be going through. And I think it's definitely part of that maturity that companies are going to have. And as you get into that third state, I think you're going to find more and more opportunities to leverage Gen AI, and you're already going to have a foundation, you're going to have the knowledge. And then it's a matter of just like, okay, here's another model we can build or leverage that's out there in the market. We have the right data and we can solve this specific use case. And so I think there's going to be a lot more of the very purpose-built solutions by use case, I think is what you're going to start to see. Because the general purpose one is out there today and people are playing around with that. But what you're starting to see the market moving towards is these like smaller models, very specific use cases. And I do think that's the world we're headed towards.
Okay, it's been fascinating to chat to you. Some great insights into what's going on. Eric, really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Philip.